Red shift here, doing my part to shift perceptions out of the pink and into the red. Okay, so I'm going to be continuing with my, this is, I think, part 4 of my hugely long script rebutting an hour-long video that SquarePeg made about me quite a while ago. And I just didn't get around to recording the script for forever, even though I made it right after I saw the video. Well, I made the voice notes, and then I recorded them transcribed it into a script, and then it took forever for me to actually record it, because I didn't really want to spend 3 hours recording a video, but, I'm recording it in segments. So, on with the script. The endless script, right? Okay, then SquarePeg says that people are going to stop listening to you when you're violent. Yes, this is true. But they weren't going to listen to you in the first place, and that's the whole problem. So who cares if they don't listen to you? They'll start listening when they're scared shitless of you. Hence the necessity of sprees. Blue-pilled people and top men, including top MGTOW men and women, don't give a shit about anybody but themselves, especially not bottom 50% men or bottom 80% men. That's the problem. They don't give a shit. The politicians don't care about us. The soldiers don't care about us. The police don't care about us. Women don't care about us. Top 5% or top 1% MGTOW men don't care about us. It's just a job to... It's just what it is. Like, the politicians and the soldiers and the cops, it's just a job to them. They don't care that the laws are tyrannical. The top MGTOW men, they don't care. MGTOW is just a movement for them to justify their own promiscuity and hedonism and selfishness and apathy. It's not actually a way that they're really trying to fight evil. If it were, they'd stop being promiscuous because, promiscuity creates the incel problem that creates the gynocentrism that they claim to be opposed to. It's ridiculous. So, the cops don't care about us. All they care about is their own paycheck and their own family. They don't care about the citizens who they're oppressing by enforcing tyrannical laws. Women don't care about men at the bottom of society, whether they're incels or not. Women don't care about any men unless that man is either her father, her brother, her son, or her husband, or, somebody important to her like that, or the guy who took her virginity. And the top men don't care about the bottom 80% of men either, as evidenced by the promiscuous sexual behavior which causes gynocentrism and divorce rape and incels. And yet they don't stop. They keep on doing it, And most men in the 80% don't care about other men either. Most people don't care about the genocide in Iraq because the bombs are not dropping in their city. The white phosphorus is not burning their kids alive, so they don't care. That's the whole problem. So who cares whether they listen? They weren't listening before, so who cares if they won't listen to you after you go on a spree? And as far as you're only going to reach the few people who already agree with you, I respond by saying, not necessarily. Number one, you are going to make it a national conversation. You really think Joe Rogan would have been talking about MGTOW or incels or anything like that before people started going on sprees and before people started going MGTOW and saying very radical things in the comment sections of MGTOW videos? Before men started making channels talking about female nature and legal misandry and all that? Hell no, he wouldn't have. He never would have talked about that stuff. So you have to make it a national conversation by going on sprees. And yeah, you're going to get demonized, but that's part of the sacrifice. You blacken your name for all of eternity, but who cares? You'll be dead or in jail, so why should you care about your reputation after you go on a spree? You know that ultimately what you do is going to make the world a better place. It's going to turn the whole incel problem into a national conversation. And people are going to say, oh yeah, that was a scumbag incel. He was a psycho. People are going to say that, right? They're going to say, but then other people will go, well, yeah, he was a scumbag psycho, but, there's all these other insults who are not violent, and we got to address their problem. We can't just leave them to, get even more radicalized and start doing the same thing because we're, depriving them of sex and love and stuff. They're going to say that, right? And it is true. It is totally insane that, these guys are being deprived of the ability to fulfill their biological imperative, their basic need to have sex, and their basic need to get love from women, right? They feel they have no reason to live, and they have no reason to not burn society to the ground, maybe not by going on killing spree, but maybe by doing other societally destructive things, right? And maybe these guys, maybe some guys will start saying, hey, these guys are going to take over the government eventually once the problem gets big enough. So let's actually start repealing the misandric laws so that these guys can get love and sex and have kids once again so they don't go on sprees. Let's lower the taxes so they're richer and can thus attract a woman. Let's end the financialization so the rent goes down. Let's end the quantitative easing and shrink the government and get us on an honest money standard so that the price of rent can go back down to a sane level again. Let's get women out of the workforce so that men can all make greater wages so that we can actually get rid of poverty or at least decrease it radically and also thereby make it easier for women to find men who are marriageable as well. right? Like let's start incentivizing people to be moral. Let's make promiscuity totally socially unacceptable, right? Like people are going to start saying all that stuff if you make it a national conversation and scare the shit out of everybody by more and more and more and more incels going on sprees, right? And if MGTOW men are more and more radical, more and more aggressive, more and more vocal, more and more men keep making MGTOW channels, right? If you know the MGTOW channels go from like 2,000 channels to 5,000 channels to 50,000 channels to 200,000 channels, I mean, imagine what that would do to society. Like society would start really paying attention then, right? And then everybody would start talking about the misandric laws and the evil of female nature and the evil of promiscuity and all the rest of it. Then everybody starts caring about the problem, especially when sprees become more and more frequent. Once every 2 months, then once every 3 months. I mean, once every 3 months, then once every 2 months, then once a month, once a fortnight, once a week, once a day. Then everyone will be saying, we have to fix this problem. And then the problem will get fixed. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. So you got to make that wheel squeak by going on a spree. Don't forget that quote from Starship Troopers. Violence has solved more problems in human history than anything else, unquote. Violence solves problems because it's the thing that everyone resorts to when they're losing. They lose an economic battle, they go to the level of physical war. That's what governments do. It always comes down to physical violence anyway, so you have to realize that reality instead of pretending that you don't have to address the violence issue. You have to. The government's using violence against you every day by enforcing laws at the point of a gun, and if you don't agree, they will come to your house and arrest you. And if you still resist that, they will shoot you. So the government is using violence, gun violence, every single day against everybody. So why shouldn't we use gun violence right back? We have to, because when you're fighting on a physical level like that, you're doing so because there's nothing else that solves the problem other than that. It's just that simple. And besides, inspiring a few more Ogdoms and Terrans by going on a spree yourself does a lot to help things. If you inspire 2 new Ogdoms or Terrans, you've already done way more than almost anybody else in the whole world. Because maybe each of those new Ogdoms will inspire maybe 2 more people to do the same thing. And then each of those 4 people will inspire 2 more people. And then those 8 people will go on sprees and inspire 2 more people. And then those 16 people will go on sprees and inspire 2 more people. And then you got more and more and more people going on sprees. And then you finally get real change because no one is willing to tolerate any more sprees over something like the incel problem, which is a problem that should not even exist in the first place. No man should be an incel, or at least virtually no men. At least not anywhere near in the numbers that incels exist these days, where it's almost 30% of the population. That's insane. But nobody cares until these people make these apathetic sheeple pay a price for their willful callousness and willful apathy and willful ignorance. And so even by inspiring just a few new Terrans or Ogdoms, you have done a ton of good for the world. And plus, the people who are smart and open-minded are the ones you want to reach. And if you leave a short little manifesto like Crucius did, then you're going to reach a few of those people, and then you might convert a few of those people because they're open-minded. Like, I used to believe in the Holocaust until very recently, and then I saw a few documentaries and it totally changed my mind. Same thing. You go on a shooting spree, you leave a smart, short manifesto, people read it, and then people start saying, why is he talking about this stuff? He went on a spree over environmentalism and corporate ownership of the U.S. and immigration? Really? There's got to be something here. We got to look into this further. And then maybe it plants a seed. And then maybe the next person that goes on a spree and says something similar in their manifesto, then everyone's like, he did his spree for the same reason as this other guy. And then, 10 years later, once the environment gets way worse and corporate ownership of the U.S. is way more blatant, they're going to start to realize, oh my God, holy crap, those guys were right. Look at all this. It's happened just like they said. And then they're going to think to themselves, dude, we got to do something about this right now. But if those seeds had not been planted, those guys would not have woken up. Not even when things got worse. You see, so even if you just convert a few people or inspire 1 or 2 people to copy your actions, then you going on a spree ended up fully justifying itself. Square Peg implies that I said that it would definitely lead to a civil war if more people go on sprees, and therefore the liberals push harder for gun control, and the politicians do too, and the conservatives are pushing harder by funding the NRA more than they normally do, and by stockpiling guns before they're made illegal. I don't recall having said that, because I distinctly seem to remember saying at some point that it would either lead to civil war, or it would lead to gun control, and then basically taking away almost everyone's guns, and then everyone's totally enslaved, and then the tyranny gets way worse, and then either that progresses and nothing changes, in which case people deserve their slavery for not fighting for freedom, or the increased slavery that comes after guns are banned results in people realizing the Second Amendment was a good thing. Governments do become tyrannical when they're allowed to be because of the people not having guns, and then the people start pushing back really hard in a way that they never did back when they had the Second Amendment. So I don't think I said that it would definitely lead to a civil war, although it probably would, although if it didn't, then the people deserve their slavery, like I said. Or they push back more after they're banned, and that pushback ends up being a good thing, a thing that increases freedom in other ways. And besides, if the Civil War is quick and easily won, then what's wrong with the Civil War? And if more people are going on sprees resulting in a balkanization of the U.S., then what's wrong with that? And if you don't need a civil war to force the government to balkanize the U.S., Crucius was right. We need to balkanize the U.S. Sorry, I think I said that previous sentence wrong. And you don't need a civil war to force the government to balkanize the U.S. Crucius was right. Crucius was right. We need to balkanize the U.S. This was obvious to me even before I read Crucius's manifesto. Anyone with a brain should be able to see that at the very least we need to balkanize the U.S. because there's no way for the people to get their way through voting when half the country is liberal and the other half is conservative. That's ridiculous, right? I'm shocked that he said the reason that men are buying more guns when there's a push for more gun control. Square Peg said this. He said that the reason that men buy more guns when there's a push for gun control is because these guys are scared for their wives and girlfriends because of incels. Sex-crazed incels. That is literally one of the most ridiculous, retarded things I've ever heard in my life. That is hilariously ridiculous. That is insane. No, these guys are buying guns because they're afraid that the guns are going to soon be made illegal, and they're doing so because they believe in freedom. They believe in the Second Amendment. Most of these guys already have multiple guns, so why would they need to buy more guns if they were just scared of incels? That's ridiculous. These guys are buying guns when there's a push for gun control because they're hardcore believers in the Second Amendment, and so they already have a few handguns and maybe a rifle, and now they're buying another AR-15 or a first one or whatever. Because they're afraid of gun control. That's why the donations to the NRA tripled after that recent shooting. I mean, recent when I wrote the script, but probably not recent now. Probably happened a few months ago. But so, they don't want to lose the Second Amendment. But if they do, then they want to have those guns. So maybe they can then say that they sold them if the cops come and ask. And then those guys can then hide those guns so they can't be confiscated. They want those guns in case a civil war does break out at some point in the future. That's why they're buying guns, not because they're scared of incels. That's preposterous. That's utterly, utterly preposterous. And I never said nor implied that these guys are scared of incels or that they should be scared of incels or that that's a good reason why incels should go on sprees. I never said that. That's ridiculous. In fact, it's the opposite. The guys who believe in guns are usually the guys who are conservative and therefore believe in family and monogamy and are therefore not part of the problem that is creating the incels. And so they therefore have far less to worry about when it comes to incels being violent. The people who should fear the incels are the women and the liberals. Roger, Elliot Rodger did not try to take out a bunch of people at a Christian church. He tried to take out a bunch of slores, that is sorority girls. He tried to take out a bunch of sorority girl slores. Now, it didn't work. I think they never answered the door when he was, knocking at the door of the sorority. But, he tried. That was his first attempt. That was what he first tried to do. He tried to take out some sorority girls, and rightly so. That is a good target. Male promiscuity is what is causing the incel problem, and these monogamous Christian conservative guys are not typically part of the promiscuity problem, the way that liberals and top 1% men are. And I never said that they were going to start a civil war because of incels going on sprees. I was saying, and I thought I was pretty clear about it, that what happens is the more people that go on sprees, the greater the push for gun control becomes. And the greater the push for gun control becomes, the greater the push for the preservation of the Second Amendment becomes. Maybe there's a civil war over it. Maybe there's balkanization of the U.S. But more likely, the government will actually accomplish gun control. And maybe then, when the government tries to confiscate all the AR-15s, maybe then there's a civil war, after there's gun control. Then there might be a civil war, started by all the people who don't want to lose their guns. And that's a civil war that would have started anyway. This is just speeding up the process so that the government is not able to enact a slow kill on us over the coming decades by slowly taking our rights. The proverbial boiling of the frog. If either civil war or utter enslavement are the only possibilities for the future, then I'd much rather have civil war because it carries the possibility of freedom and peace and prosperity and morality afterward, assuming we win the civil war. And if they don't give up their guns after their guns are banned, if they hide their guns, well, then perhaps they then start forming cohesive communes or whatever, and then they can keep the government out with those guns. Once they're all joined together and they're living in a commune like it's their own little country, right? All I know is that more force and less cowardice, more action, more resistance is a good thing. And this peaceful attitude of we can change things in a peaceful way, blah, 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 this is just cowardice in disguise. Cowardice and idiocy. Yes, peace is far better, but I'm not for forcible exsanguination if it's not necessary, but we're way past the point of peaceful solutions. And every empire falls, and this one is going to be no different. And regarding what he said about incels lighting themselves on fire in front of City Hall, this is a good idea, kind of. I've never thought of doing it cohesively because most men don't reach the breaking point of suicide at the same time. So I don't think collectivization in that type of way is going to work. But yes, if you could get multiple incels to all light themselves on fire in front of City Hall at the same time, when there are a bunch of people there, and when it's a public event with politicians there and cameras there, like news crews, and if they could distribute a manifesto, the incels, before they burn themselves alive, so then the government cannot lie and pretend that it doesn't know why the guys did it, then yeah, that might be somewhat effective. And I've already thought of that idea already, that an individual guy could light himself on fire to make a point. And yeah, it probably would make news and accomplish something, maybe a little bit, but it's not going to force the sheeple to pay a price for their willful ignorance and apathy. They can just be like, huh, wow, a guy or a bunch of guys lit themselves on fire over the incel issue. Wow. But it's not going to make them change their behavior. It's not going to make those guys change their behavior. It's not going to necessarily inspire anybody to do the same thing. And even if they do, again, the government and the sheeple fear violence. They do not fear people lighting themselves on fire and making the government look bad. Now, the government even just lies its ass off, kills people, steals all day long, every day, every year. So the government doesn't care at all if you do something like that. Not even the tiniest little bit does it care. And you have to ask, so imagine how many incels would have to light themselves on fire to change that issue. How many would have to do that? Oh my God, so many. You'd probably have to have like 10 to 50 men light themselves on fire in front of City Hall, and then have another 10 to 50 men or 100 men next time do it in front of City Hall again, maybe in a different city, and then have 500 or 1,000 incel men do it in front of City Hall again. You would have to constantly keep upping the ante to make it keep having an effect and keep making the news, and you'd have to do it faster and faster, more and more and more and more and more and more. And then it would not accomplish anything really. And what do women care? They don't care. They're going to be like, good, get those weak genes out of the gene pool. And the top men are going to be saying the same fucking thing. And what about all the rest of the middle class men? They're like, well, maybe I'd like to do something about the problem, but, men of this generation are lazy and blah, blah, blah. And even if it's not their fault, well, there's nothing I can do about it. Jesus is coming back soon. Or even if they're not Christian, they'll just be like, well, I got to take care of my family. I can't worry about those incels. They're on their own. Seriously, literally, no one would fucking care if all men, if tons and tons of incels started lighting themselves on fire. Nobody would fucking care. I'm so serious. I'm not even exaggerating at all. Almost no one would fucking care. The news people might like it because it gives them something to talk about, right? But what good is going to do? I don't think it'll do a goddamn thing. And talk about male disposability. I mean, think of how much less disposable you are when you go on a spree versus light yourself on fire, right? I mean, at least you're going to take a bunch of people with you. At least you're going to scare them. At least you're going to force them to start addressing the issue because it's now a matter of their safety because of, incels going on sprees. I mean, seriously, you got to force them to, you got to make your problem their problem. Squeaky wheel gets the grease. And if you don't make it their problem by going on sprees, they're going to keep thinking it's not their problem. They're going to keep letting it happen to you. For real, that's how it's going to be. So really, sprees are way, way better than lighting yourself on fire, And like I said, women, they view the bottom 80% of men as below average. So think about it. You could be a 7 out of 10 guy who's an incel, and you could light yourself on fire, and women are not going to give a shit. They're going to view it like it was a 1 out of 10 guy who lit himself on fire. For real. It won't accomplish anything. Probably wouldn't even accomplish much at all other than make the news a little bit if 100 guys did it. For real. Right? It's only people who are the top 10% of men or above or whatever who, women think are real men. So women are not going to care about incels lighting themselves on fire in front of City Hall. Government sure as hell isn't going to care. And the guys who are getting laid are not going to care either. And the promiscuous men are psychopaths, and so they're definitely not going to care. So you probably could have a ton of incels doing that. Literally a ton. Thousands of incels doing it. It's not going to affect anything. Nobody's going to care. Unless incels are doing it by the hundreds at the same time, and it's happening every week or more and more and more and more often, and maybe they're burning down buildings at the same time as they're doing it, yeah, then maybe something starts, people start talking about it more or whatever. But, it's only when the incels start making the sheeple pay a price for their apathy, with their lives, pay a price for their callousness and ignoring the incel problem and all the other problems, the environmental problem, the tyranny problem, surveillance state problem, the prison industrial complex problem, etc. Only when you make the sheeple pay a price with their lives, only then will they start paying attention to those problems, saying that those problems need to be fixed, because only then do those problems become their problem as well. And people these days are so selfish that they only care about the problems of others when those problems affect them, and affect them severely. That's how it is. So no, lighting yourself on fire in front of City Hall would not accomplish anything. Yeah, it would probably make national news, but it's not going to accomplish anything, that's for damn sure. Not to mention, do you really want to die by fire? That's the most horrific way to die, ever. That is the most painful way to die. No one should want to do that. The only reason that monk in Vietnam did it during the Vietnam War is because he was a monk. He was a Buddhist monk. He was incredibly accomplished in meditation. He could go into himself, he could focus, and he could completely block out all the pain. That is the only reason he did it. No sane person should ever want to light themselves on fire as a method of suicide if they're not a master meditator. Not even as a protest, because unless you're an incredibly advanced meditator, it's going to be the most horrific death ever. And then Square Peg strawmans me again. He says, well, they've been raised by public schools, so it's not their fault they're ignorant. And they have a lot of work, so they're busy and so they're ignorant. So calling them sheeple is dehumanizing. It's not fair to blame them and blah, 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 blah. But Square Peg is not listening very carefully. I almost always say willfully ignorant. I say willfully ignorant because willfully is the key word there. Because that's the clear and important distinction. I don't really blame people who are ignorant. I really don't. If they have no conception of what is going on and they've never run across the truth and they've never had a chance to deny the truth and they actually are compassionate people, they just don't have a fucking clue what's going on at all, I don't blame those people, right? But if they're willfully ignorant, then that's something completely different. They are choosing to be callous about the sufferings of others. They choose to not do anything about the environmentalism issue. They choose to not care. They choose to not care about the genocide in Iraq. They choose to ignore the incel issue. They choose to ignore the surveillance state problem. And therefore they deserve what they get. They really, really do. I don't blame ignorant people. I blame willfully ignorant people, callous people, people who choose to be ignorant and callous. These are the people who have forfeited their lives as far as I'm concerned. These sheeple should be taken out of the gene pool. And then he says something like, have you ever even lived in an inner city or a dangerous city or an area or a war zone or whatever? Okay, whether I've been in a war zone or lived in a dangerous area is completely irrelevant. But regarding whether I would be willing to live in a war zone versus live in this tyrannical psychotic society, yes, I would be willing to live in a war zone. I'd be willing to die to make the world a better place. Because it's the attitude of, do you really want to live in an uncomfortable war zone? You might get killed. Isn't it just better to keep paying taxes? That attitude, do you really want to live in a war zone? You might get killed. Isn't it just better to keep paying taxes? That very attitude, that cowardly attitude, is what makes it so that tyranny advances every single year, and more men get impoverished and disenfranchised every year and divorce raped every year. Everything gets worse and worse because of that very same attitude. That very attitude of like, well, that would be horrible. Don't you want to just, play it safe, keep paying your taxes, I get killed if we have a civil war. That very cowardly attitude is why we live in a prison industrial complex, surveillance state hell, with misandric laws which uses fiat currency, which impoverishes the 99%, and which has 29% of the population which are incels. That attitude of Square Pegs is why the world has all the problems that it has. Because of that cowardly attitude of not wanting to do anything because of the horror of war. Well, let me tell you, the horror of enslavement is far worse than the horror of war. It may seem to be not as bad, but it is far, far more destructive to the souls of people. And that cowardly attitude is putting the very survival of the human species at risk of going extinct. And we are, verging on extinction because of that cowardly attitude. And if people of 50 to 100 years ago had not had that same cowardly attitude, then they could have fixed the problems extremely easily with very little bloodshed, with very little destruction. But they let the problem get immeasurably worse because they had that exact same attitude of, do you really want to live in a war zone? Isn't it better to just keep paying taxes and live in a nice area? You're underestimating the suffering of how horrific it would be if we had a civil war. No, I'm not. I'm saying that if you have any principles at all, you have the attitude of give me liberty or give me death. If you have that attitude, then yes, you are willing to die. And you are willing to live in a war zone in order to make the world a better place. Not just for yourself, but for the billions of people who are going to be born in the future. Trillions, probably. Trillions of people will be born into utter slavery if we don't turn it around now. If you don't overthrow the government now, then the tyranny will continue for centuries, perhaps. Maybe thousands of years. And billions, if not trillions of people will be utterly enslaved and will suffer horrors beyond imagining. And this is not hyperbole. All because you wanted to short-sightedly all because you just wanted to short-sightedly live a more comfortable world, in a more comfortable way, and keep paying taxes because, oh no, war zone is too horrible, I gotta keep paying taxes, not fighting. Blah, blah, blah. That is ridiculous. That is so ridiculous, I have no words for how ridiculous that kind of thinking is. That kind of stupid, cowardly thinking is exactly why slaves and women never had the vote in America. Plus, there's the bonus that when you're living in a war zone, all of a sudden women capitulate. And I'm not even saying that because then they start giving men sex. I'm just saying, like, all of a sudden feminism dies. It utterly dies when women are living in a war zone because women want male protection and then they utterly cave and then they give up all this feminist independent woman bullshit. And then you start getting a more sane society. You get loyal women, you get faithful women, you get submissive women, you get women who are using their powers of manipulation and deceit and seduction on behalf of the 99% instead of on behalf of themselves or the 1%. And all the men who are fighting in that war develop a sense of camaraderie with each other and brotherhood. And then they get invested in the war once their brothers in arms die, and then they're invested in the war. And then they want to win no matter what for their friends who have already died and their cousins who have died and everybody else who's already died. And those whose survival have a much better appreciation of virtue, a much better appreciation of freedom, a much better appreciation of the importance of feeling kinship with other men, and male cohesiveness will come back because of the hardships of the war. So the hardships and horror of war are not all bad. There's an upside to it also. This is really important to understand. If men already had those virtues today, then I would not be able to claim this as an upside of war. But we don't have those virtues today. And yet these virtues of loyalty, compassion, frugality, bravery, etc. are essential virtues and must be brought back no matter what. So the return of these virtues is a good thing and is a big upside of having war. It's not the main reason to have war, but it's a huge silver lining that makes up for the horror of war, maybe not immediately, but over the long term, including the much freer, more virtuous time after the war is over. The horror of the war is justified by the increase in freedom. The horror of the war is justified by the increase in freedom and morality that occurs as a result of having freed ourselves from tyranny and the freedom that we have after the war has been won, right? Assuming we win. And you can always win, especially if you never give up. And let's see here. Yeah, I'll keep doing this one. Maybe I'll do one more video. But I'm not going to end this one quite yet. I thought I might, but I'm going to do a little more. In regards to his claim that I'm an incel, I've never said that I'm an incel. Number one, he's making the assertion that I am with no evidence whatsoever. But, leave that aside. Let me point out the fact that he's trying to point out the horrors of war, as if this is some kind of reason why we should not have war, like a Revolutionary War or Civil War. No, that's the very reason we should have Revolutionary Civil War, because that's the kind of horror that our government is inflicting on innocent people overseas. That's right. And that crap is just going to continue endlessly if we don't overthrow our government. So we can either overthrow our government and then end war for 100 years, maybe longer, or we can just continue not only being slaves in our own country, but, also allowing and funding the genocide that our government is perpetuating overseas. That horrible, horrible war that you're trying to avoid by not overthrowing our government. As if you don't really give a shit about people overseas, you square peg. If war is really so fucking horrible, like Square Peg's talking about, then why doesn't he feel compassion for the people overseas that our government is killing by the millions? That genocide necessitates that we overthrow our government. It makes it a moral imperative that we overthrow our government. Even if we don't really care about increasing freedom for ourselves or prosperity for ourselves, we should be overthrowing the government for their sake, for all the millions of innocent people who are being killed by our government, and all the millions more who will die in the future if we don't overthrow our government. So this whole argument of his is my argument. Even though he doesn't realize it, he's making my argument for me. He's making my case for me. Either that, or he's just exposing himself as not only a person who tolerates tyranny against himself and all his fellow citizens in his country, but he's also exposing himself as someone who doesn't care about the mass murder of innocent Middle Easterners. All because their countries have the oil, and America has selfishly chosen to base its economy and fiat dollar on oil. That is to say, we wage war in Middle Eastern countries merely to keep control of those countries and keep them on the petrodollar so that America can keep getting an unfair economic advantage. Not to mention, the other aspect of that argument is that he's saying, well, have you ever lived in a gang neighborhood or anything like that? And I'll respond by saying this, and I'll respond by saying this. Those places that he's talking about, those gang neighborhoods, those horrible places, are what result from low IQ, and if we keep letting the elites have their way, they're going to continue incentivizing and telling women to breed with low IQ minorities, and thereby lower the IQs of the whole country. Not to mention make the white race a minority in their own country, and our country will then be full of 85 IQ Latinos and 93 IQ mulattoes. And then, yeah, you'll have a hell of a lot more gang violence. You'll have a hell of a lot more suffering, because low IQ makes a non-functional and violent society. Now your society may be violent toward others if you have a high IQ, like the Jewish people in Israel, but that's no reason to not have high IQs, because it's also possible to have a high IQ society that is not violent toward other people. So acting like war zones are horrible and we should not want war, as if that's some kind of rebuttal of my position, as if that's some kind of reason for why we should not have revolutionary or civil war, is retarded. Because a lot of those places, like gang-ridden neighborhoods, they're not just crappy because of violence. They're crappy because the people there have low IQs. That's part of the reason why those places are the way they are. And that's why the people there join gangs in the first place. Because they have low IQs and cannot do anything else but join a gang to survive. And who made those inner city areas so much worse? The government, by trafficking cocaine into those areas in the 1980s. The CIA did that. So that's another reason to overthrow the government. Those gang areas are not just... They didn't just arise out of nothing. They arise because of low IQ and the drug, pushing that CIA did in those areas in the 80s, which is, they've never recovered from that, and other things, fiat currency and all kinds of other things. All reasons to overthrow the government. Those places being that bad is not a reason why we shouldn't have war. Those places in the country that are ridden by gangs and stuff, that's a reason to overthrow the government. Because that crap would all go away if we overthrew the government. For sure, it's like... It's ridiculous, it's so ridiculous, It's like these people, I don't even know what to say about it, but like, regarding like gangs and stuff, it's like a lot of these people have to join a gang to survive, right? And by the way, it's government that has destroyed the morals and the sense of community in America, not just in those areas with trafficking drugs into their communities, but also in all of America by promoting evil propaganda that encourages sexual degeneracy and all kinds of bad behavior, all kinds of bad behavior. So, the very fact that there are gangs in America is a direct result of the actions of the government and the multinational corporations. So you can't blame the danger of those gang-controlled areas on violence. You have to blame it on low IQ and on government tyranny, because those people, being low IQ, have almost nothing else that they possibly can do. So violence is the inevitable result. Violence is a neutral thing. It can either be good or bad, depending on who is doing it. In other words, depending on what purposes violence is being wielded for, and whether it's being used necessarily or unnecessarily, or excessively or judiciously. Violence used by good people against evil people and used in no greater amounts than is necessary for it to be used, that kind of, forcible exsanguination or beatings or whatever is a very good thing. It may seem unconscionably horrific when you're in the midst of it, but it's far better in the long run than continuing to tolerate tyranny. You have to realize that, yeah, war is hell. War is horror. But who's to blame for that? The people who start the Revolutionary War or the tyrannical people who made it necessary in the first place? And plus, like, once the war is over, it's going to be way, 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 way better for a long, 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 long time. So it totally makes it worth it. Not to mention, like, we don't even have depressions anymore these days. So it's like, how are we going to get people to appreciate life if not for, taking lives? And if we're going to take lives, yeah, let's take the lives of the people at the top, the evil people, the Jamie Dimons and the Janet Yellens and the alt-MGTOWs of the world. These people are the ones who have created gynocentrism and kept the fiat currency system going and all the rest of it. Stolen billions of dollars. I mean, these people are not good people. They are the problem. Like Christopher Nolan wrote in The Dark Knight, killing is making a choice. And I will add that not killing is also making a choice. When you choose to not kill evil people because you fear your own death, you are thereby choosing to let evil win. And you are therefore complicit in the deaths of all the innocent people that those evil people in power choose to kill with their endless wars in the future. So, really, the government is to blame, and there is no excuse for not waging a war. All those reasons that you're giving for why we shouldn't wage war are actually reasons for why we should wage war. Okay, I'm going to do another video, maybe another 2 videos with the rest of this script, but I'm going to end this one here. This has been Redshift. Thumbs up, thumbs down, peace trucks.